The atmosphere around West Ham United remains clouded with uncertainty and speculation. In recent hours, 3 rumors have dominated the headlines concerning the club. First, the claim that the board have suddenly been taken aback by the high transfer. Fees being demanded for players of interest. Second, the suggestion that Lucas Paquetá could be sold if an offer of £60 million arrives. And third, the idea that Graham Potter has only 2 games left to save his job. Amid such noise, it is crucial to reflect on what carries genuine weight and what amounts to little more than gossip. In previous windows, West Ham have been linked with countless players, yet only a handful have actually joined. This illustrates how much of the talk exists merely to feed speculation rather than to reflect real negotiations. The current situation does not seem much different. Starting with Lucas Paquetá, reports claim Tottenham and Aston Villa are monitoring the player, and that an offer of £60 million might persuade West Ham to cash in. However, a more detailed assessment suggests that any sale would only be considered if several signings were secured beforehand. Given the lack of confidence that even a single significant arrival can be concluded in such a short space of time, it is highly unlikely that Paquetá will depart now. It is more reasonable to expect the Brazilian to remain at least until the end of this summer window. Should the team's performances continue to fall below expectations by January, then perhaps he himself might begin to consider leaving. Even so, offloading Paquetá without an adequate replacement would be deeply concerning, raising questions about the board's true intentions. Would the club simply be cashing in on assets to cut costs, even if that meant jeopardizing results on the pitch? Such a strategy could carry grave consequences. The club's valuation has been quoted at around £800 million, already an inflated figure in the current circumstances. Were West Ham to be relegated, that estimate would plummet possibly to less than half. On top of that, parachute payments would do little to offset the loss of Premier League income and the instant devaluation of key players. Jared Bowen, for instance, is valued at £80 million today, but if the club went down, he might fetch no more than 20 or 25 million. In this context, a premature sale of Paquetá makes neither sporting nor financial sense. Retaining the Brazilian is essential to preserving any chance of competitiveness in the short term and avoiding structural weakness across the squad. At the same time, the lack of firm action in the market reinforces the perception that the board remain paralyzed, unable to provide Graham Potter with the tools he needs to turn around the team's fortunes. The manager, who took charge with promises of support and renewal, now finds himself frustrated with a squad short on depth and lacking the reinforcements that had been pledged. The second issue that has circulated in recent hours relates to the supposed surprise of West Ham's board at the prices being quoted in the transfer market. Some reports suggest that senior figures were astonished at the sums being asked for. Players the club are pursuing. This narrative is difficult to take at face value. In a market as competitive as the Premier League, it is hardly a revelation that fees climb steeply, especially when negotiations are left until the final stretch of the window. The central problem is not the inflated valuations themselves, but rather the strategy adopted by West Ham. By acting so late, the board place themselves in a position of weakness. Other clubs have already moved early, sold surplus players, and reinforced their squads. When West Ham finally enter the fray, selling clubs recognize the desperation and take advantage by raising their demands. It is a predictable dynamic. Those who delay until the last minute inevitably pay more and have fewer options. A simple example illustrates this pattern. Imagine West Ham calling a club about a central midfielder. At the start of the summer, the price might have been around £17 million, yet by late August, the same players' club have already balanced their books and completed their business. They no longer have urgency to sell and will only do so at a premium. The price rises to £28 million plus additional add-ons. West Ham, short on time and under pressure from their supporters, are left with little choice but to consider the inflated offer. This is how the market works. Procrastination carries a cost. This recurring behavior year after year reinforces the impression that West Ham's leadership lack a coherent sporting plan. Clubs of similar or even smaller stature have anticipated their moves and secured reinforcements at reasonable fees. Meanwhile, the Hammers appear trapped in a cycle of protracted negotiations that often collapse before completion. The result is a squad weaker than those of their direct rivals. The consequences go beyond finance. On the pitch, Potter must contend with glaring gaps. The shortage of depth in midfield and the lack of defensive options compromise results. With every week that passes without reinforcements, the likelihood of defeats grows while the patience of the supporters wears thinner. Boos and mounting tension in the stands may not directly dictate the manager's fate, but they certainly help to create a hostile atmosphere. Moreover, if players sense that the club are unwilling to invest, squad morale inevitably dips. What we see, therefore, is not genuine surprise at market prices, but rather a convenient excuse to mask inertia. Claiming that transfer fees are too high provides cover shifting the blame onto others when the real failure lies in-house, a lack of planning, slow execution, and an absence of clear strategy. In the meantime, rivals strengthen and West Ham risk being left behind. This supposed astonishment at valuations thus functions as little more than a smokescreen. Supporters are not fooled. They recognize it as an attempt to deflect frustration over failed business. But patience has its limits. Each poor result increases the demand for tangible action. By now, West Ham ought to be fine-tuning their squad. Yet instead, they are scrambling to fill fundamental holes. This reversal of priorities demonstrates just how far the club's current leadership falls short of what is required at Premier League level. The third major rumor doing the round centers directly on the future of Graham Potter at West Ham. Reports have claimed that he has only 2 games to save his job. Such a statement, however, appears simplistic and detached from reality. It is obvious that Potter is under pressure, but reducing his evaluation to just 2 matches does not reflect the wider circumstances surrounding the club. West Ham are currently in a difficult spell, with results falling short of expectations and a sense of stagnation evident on the pitch. The recent run of games has provided little encouragement, fueling further criticism from supporters who fear a collapse reminiscent of past managerial failures. Comparisons with Avram Grant, for example, arise naturally statistically. Potter's record is only marginally better than that of the Israeli during his spell under the same ownership. That parallel unsettles fans, evoking memories of disappointing results and the looming threat of relegation. Within this context, the key question is whether Potter is genuinely in immediate danger of dismissal. The more balanced answer is that he has slightly more room for maneuver. It is suggested that he may have around 4 Premier League matches in which to demonstrate improvement. These fixtures include crucial encounters against Nottingham Forest, Tottenham, Crystal Palace, and Everton. The equation is straightforward. If West Ham fail to win any of these games, the board will struggle to resist the growing pressure, and a parting of ways will become almost unavoidable. Interestingly, the Carabao Cup tie against Wolverhampton is unlikely to weigh heavily in this assessment. While the competition is important, Potter's future will hinge far more on league performance. The Premier League is the financial and sporting priority. Elimination from a domestic cup would not be decisive, but a sequence of league defeats most certainly would. Adding further intrigue are suggestions that David Sullivan, one of the club's principal figures, was never entirely convinced about Potter's appointment. It was reportedly Karen Brady who strongly advocated for his arrival, securing him a 2.5-year contract, whereas Sullivan preferred a short-term deal until the end of the previous season. Such internal division may have undermined stability from the outset. Some even speculate that Sullivan's reluctance to back Potter in the transfer market is a deliberate strategy to hasten his downfall. Whatever the truth, the manager must now find solutions on the pitch. His recent press conferences have shown signs of strain, as though he recognizes that the promised support has not materialized. When he agreed to take charge, Potter was given assurances of consistent reinforcement. Now, months later, the reality is different. Few additions have arrived, glaring gaps remain, and the squad struggles to compete at the required level. The dilemma is stark. Should Potter secure positive results over the coming fixtures, he will gain more time and possibly enough backing to demand investment in January. If, however, the sequence yields only defeats, his position will become untenable. At that point, the conversation will inevitably turn to possible successors. Names such as Sean Dyche, Steve Cooper, and even Ange Postecoglou have been floated. Each would bring a distinct approach, yet all would face the same daunting task of steering West Ham clear of relegation. There is also an irony in the prospect of David Moyes, now manager of Everton, potentially delivering the decisive blow to Potter's tenure. Should West Ham fall to Moyes' side, it could prove symbolic given that despite his own controversies, Moyes delivered stability and even European success during his spell in charge. In summary, Graham Potter is indeed in trouble, but the time frame is not as short as 2 matches. Realistically, the next 4 league games will be decisive. The outcome of this run will determine whether he can continue his project or be replaced. Until then, tension surrounds every fixture with the growing sense that each one now carries the weight of a final. West Ham are navigating a period of considerable uncertainty, both on and off the pitch. The 3 recent stories, the potential sale of Lucas Paquetá, the board's supposed shock at inflated market prices, and the rumors surrounding Graham. Potter's job security reflect an unstable environment in which trust between the club, the supporters, and the squad appears eroded. In Paquetá's case, selling him at this stage would be not only a sporting mistake but also a financial risk, weakening the side without any realistic chance of proper replacement. As for the high transfer fees, the board cannot feign surprise. Such inflation is a direct consequence of delaying action until the end of the window. Regarding Potter, it is clear that he is under scrutiny, but the true time frame for judgment is longer than just 2 matches, even though the upcoming league fixtures could prove decisive. Adding to the tension is the perception of internal conflict. At board level, David Sullivan is believed to have favored a different contractual model for Potter, while Karen Brady strongly pushed for his appointment. Such divisions within the leadership only weaken the overall environment and project to the supporters the image of a club without strategic unity. The risks are significant. Without quality reinforcements and immediate results, West Ham may find themselves dragged into a relegation battle. The consequences would be severe: a sharp drop in the club's valuation, substantial financial losses, and the devaluation of key players such as Jared Bowen and Paquetá himself. Falling into the championship would not only reduce income, but also damage the prestige of the institution. There remains, however, a narrow path towards recovery. Even a small number of well-chosen signings could provide Potter with the minimum tools required to reorganize his team. Should results improve in the coming weeks, the mood could shift, laying the foundations for a more coherent strategy in January. Without such change, though, the pressure will grow irresistible. In essence, West Ham must decide whether they intend to act as protagonists or as victims of circumstance. The supporters demand clarity, investment, and ambition. Without those, this season risks becoming yet another chapter of frustration, marked by short-term thinking, improvisation, and the sense of a club unable to match its potential.